Top focus on the show today.
It is the first of its kind terror attack in India. The enemies have used an unmanned aerial vehicle or a UAV to drop an improvised explosive device on the Indian Air Force base in Jammu. The IED made a deep crater in the concrete roof of the building, and this just shows how powerful the explosive was. But was this the work of the Pakistan Army or Pakistani terrorists? It's still a matter of investigation, but the attack marks a paradigm shift in the threat that India faces, a new threat of drone strikes from the skies. Sunil Ji Bhatt brings you our top story.
A major security nightmare in Jammu. India faces its first drone attack. Two IED payloads carried by a drone rocks Jammu Air Force Station with low-intensity explosions, leaving 2 personnel injured. The first blast took place at 1:37 a.m., while second explosion took place 5 minutes later at 1:42 a.m., causing minor damages. 2 suspects have been detained by the forces, while the National Investigation Agency is carrying out further probe. An FIR has been registered under Sections of UAPA and Explosives Act. Cops tell India Today that the drones were operated from near the air base. Intel sources reveal that the valley was already alerted about a possible drone strike on June 24th.
Definitely, I think we need to be alert on this aspect of the drone, and the security and protection of the sensitive areas installation is very important.
After the attack, IG Kashmir chaired an urgent meeting with the NSG, Indian Air Force and CRPF officers. After the meet, Ambala, Pathankot and Avantipora Air Force stations, Srinagar and Srinagar Technical Airport have been put on high alert. Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal RKS Bhadauria and Union Defence Minister Rajnath Singh are closely monitoring the situation.
J&K police has confirmed that a Lashkar terrorist has been arrested and huge cache of arms and ammunition has been recovered from him, and it's believed that this terrorist was planning to carry out major terror attacks at crowded places in Jammu. So a major terror plot has been averted, has been thwarted by the Jammu police. And as far as this case is concerned, the twin blasts at the Air Force Station, probe is on, matter is being investigated, but what is coming out from the preliminary investigation is that a drone has been used to carry out the twin blasts inside the Air Force Station. With video journalist Neeraj Kumar, this is Sunil Bhatt reporting from Jammu for India Today.
Drones or unmanned aerial vehicles are an absolute game changer in future combat. They are small, very difficult to detect on radars, and some have long endurance and can carry different payloads. Drones changed the outcome of war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Drones in the hands of terrorists are an absolute nightmare for security forces. For example, protecting aircraft at bases or radars or ammunition depots, vital assets and vital points, or even moving or stationary convoys from drone-mounted IEDs is the next big threat, extremely difficult to counter.
The future warfare is said to be unmanned. India saw a small glimpse of it. The twin blasts in the Jammu Air Force Station are said to be the first drone attack on Indian military establishment. Alarm bells ringing over the lurking threat. A big hole on the roof of a building inside Jammu Air Force Station, where 2 blasts took place early Sunday morning, indicates an aerial attack using drones was part of the plot to target helicopters. The use of drones to carry out bombings might be a first in India, but it's a tried and tested attack method.
It is important and pertinent for the security forces to be able to have a 24/7 surveillance to ensure that such attacks are discerned and nipped in the bud if that were required to be done and if we are capable of. And if not, then be able to find the source and have a response mechanism even of retaliation.
Taliban have deployed small drones to drop bombs on government forces in recent attacks. Even ISIS has used the ploy to carry out attacks. Here is how drone attacks work. Drone attacks can be carried out by dropping bombs, firing missiles, or crashing armed UAV into the target. The stealth features allow the drones to go undetected, making deep penetrations.
The civil Kashmir is safer than vital points which we hold along the border or in the hinterland. These air bases and sensitive locations should be absolutely out of bounds for Pakistan to strike in any form, either directly, indirectly, or by cultivating sources to strike them from our side.
US forces have also adopted the strategy of drone warfare to ensure there are less casualties. More recently, the Azerbaijan used armed drones against Armenia last year. Various kinds of armed drones can carry payloads of about the weight of a grenade or a handgun. But new technology could soon come, allowing heavier payloads. Not just military targets, but drones could pose a big threat to critical civilian infrastructure like dams, power plants and bridges in time to come.
The intelligences need to be a little more vigilant, and they need to make sure that at least this strike is called out in the right measure in terms of evidences. And obviously, there should be punitive action both against Pakistan and also the inimicals who may or may not have supported this cause or tend to propagate the Pakistani cause in times when our country is progressing towards development and peace and prosperity in J&K. There cannot be these pullbacks being imposed whether by the inimical cabal or our adversary.
Drones are changing the face of modern warfare. Aerial attacks using drones loaded with missiles and laser-guided bombs capable of destroying targets deep inside enemy territory are the way forward. India too is developing such technology to boost its unmanned warfare tactics. China is a big player when it comes to drones and unmanned aerial vehicles. But Pakistan is also looking at using armed drones with Beijing's help. China has invested a lot of effort in developing civilian drones, and the same has been translated into combat drones. China is also one of the leading countries when it comes to R&D concerning drone technology.
The damage after the attack might have been minimal, but it has huge implications for the security establishment. Whether this was a trial run for something more sinister or a terror attack gone wrong, only an investigation will reveal. But India needs to ramp up its unmanned warfare capabilities because it is now clear that drone attacks are a reality. Abhishek Bhalla in New Delhi for India Today.
There is clear and present danger, and the threat is huge. Joining me on India First, the most authoritative voices on matters military, Air Marshal P.S. Ahluwalia, former Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Air Command, S.P. Vaid is former Director General of the Jammu and Kashmir Police. My first question is to Sandeep Unnithan, Executive Editor, India Today magazine. Sandeep, what more do we know about the nature of the UAV and the IED? To blow a crater, Sandeep, in the concrete roof would require something close to military-grade explosives and hardware.
Well, absolutely, Gaurav. Sappers who have studied the photographs that have emerged from the base have told me that this appears to be the work of a shaped charge. And a shaped charge, as you know, is plastic explosive that's shaped in a certain way to punch through concrete and armor and steel. And this is exactly what seems to have been used in Jammu as well. And there's a very high likelihood, Gaurav, of the fact that this could have come from across the border. We are not very far off the mark because from 2019 onwards, there's been a repeated pattern of quadcopters and hexacopters being flown from across the border, flying consignments of arms, ammunition, explosives. And the explosives in this case, for instance, is believed to be in the range of 3 to 4 kilos of plastic explosive to cause this kind of damage, Gaurav. So every clue that we've recovered today seems to suggest to the perpetrators being across the border.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, can drones be detected on radars in future? How difficult will it be to protect our assets, be it aircraft or radars, if the threat is either from across the border or the enemy within?
Undoubtedly, the biggest challenge for these kind of threats, which you might wish to refer to as asymmetric threats, is the detection. So for anything, you have to first detect before you can kill or destroy. The type of drones that you've got today has become an immediate and a major threat to everybody, to all concerned in the world today. So therefore, what do we have to protect ourselves? Because there are 5 types of drones that you can have: type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5. You can start, backwards. You have the Reaper, you have the MQ-9, which the Navy has got, which is huge, and it flies for 8 or 9 hours, carries a maximum payload of maybe 1,000 kilos, and is deadly. Then you got type 4, you got type 3, you got type 2, you got type 1. You also have the types like 4, wherein, the Saudi refinery was struck 700 kilometers away. To cut the long story short, basically what has been used here is type 1 stroke type 2. That means the total weight of the UAV, if you want to call that, is just about a kilo and a half, if at all. And the warhead that was carrying maybe about 500, half a kg, or maybe a maximum of 1 kg. So what this actually is, it makes a hole, and it has made a huge hole in the RCC structure.
Yes.
This was, the crew room where the men were resting who look after the helicopters of the base. What we need to do in the future is start worrying about this in a big, big way. Because 2 aspects. Number 1, how do you detect?
Yes.
Number 2, you kill. And detection, you need extremely, extremely sensitive sensors to detect, to track, and then to destroy. You need laser, because laser is very effective against these things.
Okay.
But the tracking is just 3 to 5 seconds, and the laser can kill up to about 3 kilometers. So the biggest issue today is whether we are prepared for these kind of threats or not.
Absolutely. And Mr. Ved, this marks a paradigm shift in counter-terror operations. Terrorists with drone-mounted IEDs actually means whether you have walls or sentries, they become virtually redundant. Vital assets, vital points, convoys, all open to threat from the skies.
Absolutely, Gaurav. This brings a paradigm shift in the process of securing vital installation. Jammu Airport is, I think, one of the most sensitive airports in the country, and a very, very important installation in Jammu, likewise in Srinagar Airport, in Srinagar. And these airports are very well protected, but from the ground. And attack from the air adds a new dimension. And we need to now in future take steps how to protect any attack from the air. And today it has been demonstrated, unfortunately, by our enemies. See, we need to, I think, take a holistic view how to go about protecting vital installations. Jammu Airport has a lot of defense assets which need to be protected.
Oh, absolutely. Sandeep, we have jammers, and jammers have been used at the international border and LC to counter Pakistani UAVs that send drugs, arms and ammunition in the past. But what's the thinking in the security establishment? This actually means imposition of huge costs on us when it comes to countering an asymmetric threat that comes from across.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And this is not the first time, and it's not that the Air Force did not know of this threat, because I know for a fact a few years back, Air Force authorities in the Jammu Air Base itself, the airbase in question, did begin a movement with the local police authorities to get them to identify drones before they could be used. This was about 4 or 5 years back.
Yes.
There were, notifications issued to get them to, track suspicious drone activity around the perimeter of the base. So that's, so much for the fact that this was not a threat that was totally unexpected. The other aspect is, of course, the attempt here, and this is a classic case of gray zone warfare, where your adversary attempts to impose costs on you. And to my mind, there is only so much that you can do to protect all your VAs and VPs. There is, you're going to run out of resources, Gaurav, if you're going to have to protect every single VA and VP along your international border,
Oh,
which is your airfields and bases and so on and so
In
forth.
fact, that's the question I want to take to Air Marshal Ahluwalia. To get these lasers and all these devices or put jammers everywhere, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, means a huge cost. Grey zone warfare where the enemy doesn't bleed, but own forces bleed. What's the most effective counter?
It's so surprising that we are now talking about a paradigm shift. This paradigm shift, Gaurav, took place 10 years ago. I mean, the whole world is concerned about having these kind of drones, which is some sort of asymmetric warfare.
It is absolute asymmetric warfare, but even a rich country like Saudi Arabia finds it very difficult to counter it, sir. So what is the best way to counter it? Whether the threat came earlier or now, we have a problem today. How do you counter it?
Let me answer that for you. That basically, these are very slow-moving threats. So therefore, you have to be able to detect slow-moving threats. Any kind of radar that you have today, if it is slower, it is more difficult to detect, because the radar itself works on the principle of shifting from the last known position. So what do? You have radars which are able to identify these. You have the Curve radar and you have others. We should have got all this quite some time ago. You have to identify and categorize not VAs and VPs as such. But you can imagine what happens on Independence Day and Republic Day,
yes,
where you got a concentration of people in a very small area, and you have to protect them. And it's about high time we started we know how to protect. Like I mentioned to you, this jamming business is okay, but the jammers are not absolutely totally. You can neutralize them. It's okay, but we are using GPS systems. They're autonomous. They are going in an autonomous navigation mode, and they're going to the target. So what do you have to do? You have to kill them, and don't talk about the Iron Dome of the Israelis and all that bumps that comes up,
yes,
because that is only those rockets and things like that. Those are unguided rockets, and just like you have unguided speech on all these efforts. So basically, we need to get down. We need to assess the threat very clearly, which we should have done 10 years ago.
Mr. Ved, is it too premature to link either this with talks that the Prime Minister had with leaders of Jammu and Kashmir, or with the incident at Lahore where terrorists close to Hafiz Saeed were neutralized, or would you see a link?
Undoubtedly, Gaurav, that this is an indication, because basically these are you can say like sound bites.
Okay.
For you to understand that we are around.
Okay, I want to bring in Mr. Ved for a moment, Air Marshal Ahluwalia. With Air Marshal Ahluwalia, just give me a moment. Mr. Ved, if you can hear me, would you link this to Prime Minister's talks with leaders of Jammu and Kashmir earlier, and of course that incident that took place at Lahore?
See, there is a possibility of link, because the people who are executing such attacks from across the border would never like normalcy to return in Kashmir. And whenever peace initiatives have been taken in the past, some major action is undertaken by ISI and its handlers. And it could be a linkage to the Kashmir talks and Hafiz Saeed incident.
Okay. Sandeep, the response will also have to be technology driven. Signal jammers, for example. can they be used by day and night? Detecting a UAV either by naked eye or through binoculars becomes extremely difficult at night. What are countermeasures that the government is looking at? Because we were aware of this threat even earlier. It's just been executed now.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And in fact, ever since the Aramco attack in September 2019, there have been multiple presentations made to the government, various ministries, internal security, and of course the defense ministry, where they have examined the technology that exists to counter drones. And many of these technologies include, day and night cameras and, radars that are able to detect slow-flying UAVs of the kind that Air Marshal Ahluwalia mentioned. All of these technologies are available, Gaurav, in the market. There are even counter drone technologies like kinetic means to intercept these drones, which are basically very fast-moving small drones which can shoot these drones down. All the technology exists. They're available. The vendors are known. The companies that make them are known. It's only a matter of taking that leap forward and starting the process of getting this together, indigenously if possible, Gaurav, because this is something you don't want to be dependent on another country for. So this is clearly an area the government should really take a call on. It's been 2 years in the pipeline and 2 years too late.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, should India's response be defensive, or should India actually be thinking of imposing costs on the perpetrators so that the perpetrators know that it would be counterproductive for them to use such tactics? Because this time there was just a hole that was punched into a wall, into the concrete roof. God forbid, tomorrow, if successful or if emboldened, they could target an aircraft or assets which are worth millions of dollars.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I said, that I agree with Sandeep, except it's not 2 years, but it's been about 5 or 6 years that all these things are in the plate. And all we do is think about it, all we do is discuss about it. But when it comes to actually getting the stuff, that's very important. And I can identify for you at least 10, 11, 12 different targets which will be very vulnerable. You can't identify, look after the whole country.
Yes.
Every little target. No. But it's all available. And like I said, what do you need? You need, for these slow-moving targets, you need a sensor, a good sensor, like a curve radar, which is available, which detects it, and then you need to kill it. And the best way to kill it is a laser beam. The laser beam has its own limitations. It's got, about 10 kilowatts or 20. It'll be very good, but you have to accurately track it for at least 3 to 5 seconds. And that is where the sensor-killer combination is very, very essential. You have a system which is in the plate of actually the war fighters, and let's not talk about the government is given and so-and-so is given. It is the war fighters that have to decide. And it's about time they decided for a system to protect, shall we say, the NCR region. It is so crucial. I'm repeating it. Get on with it, please. Please get on with it.
Yes.
Because that will include a slightly medium-range missile. It will include a short-range missile. It will include your HEL. And if you want further, there is something known as, Felix systems, which fires about 4,600 rounds per minute.
But again, all of this is costs on us and not on the adversary. How does one impose costs on the adversary? Balakot was, before I bring in Mr. Ved, Sandeep, Balakot was imposing cost on the adversary and we had relative peace. Now you buy all this hardware, the adversary will still be one step ahead and then you'll end up buying more equipment. So it's low cost option for the adversary and high cost option for you. That's such a defensive mindset. Do we need to get out of this defensive mindset, Sandeep?
Absolutely, Gaurav. This is, of course, the government's call to take, because as we noticed with terror attacks on the Indian mainland as well, a decade ago, it was pushing the envelope. Every single attack would, was kind of probing the envelope. First, they attacked in Jammu and Kashmir, then they started moving into Delhi, and then finally into the Indian hinterland. So my point is that if these attacks, like I said earlier, there's only a limited amount of vital installations that you can protect. You can't protect the whole country from, drone and IED attacks. So obviously, this problem has to be tackled at its source, which is across the border. And the government has to work out ways in which to either convey that message using the various options that it has at its disposal, Gaurav.
Because Mr. Ved, quadcopters would require line of sight. A UAV perhaps would require a smaller, type 1, type 2 at least would require line of sight. Anything type 4, type 5 would mean it's an act of war. But if it is this grey zone warfare where terrorists are being used, now illegal dwellings close to air bases or military bases, how does one deal with that threat? For example, when I was covering the Sanjuan military station terror attack, you had Rohingyas who had their camp just adjacent to a military station that was targeted by terrorists.
That's right.
Gaurav, it's very important to understand that we have changed political thinking now after the Pulwama attack.
Yes.
And after the Pulwama attack, the political landscape, decision making has changed completely. That's why Balakot came into the picture. So to answer your question right in the beginning, that we firstly have to have deterrence. We've got to make it hard for anybody to get to us. We have to neutralize the threat before it comes to us. But very importantly, like you said, you have to make them pay. There's got to be a cost. What do you think is happening between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
Okay.
For every rocket that is fired, you get 1,000 kg bomb coming at you. So you perhaps have to be on the offensive. You have to have deterrence. You have to make the other side understand that you are going to pay for it.
Absolutely. But how do you do that? How do you do that when in your own country, everyone is not on the same page when it comes to the threat the country faces? And Mr. Ved, if I could come back to you, sir, with the question on that Sanjuan military station. Now, we've had military stations being repeatedly targeted by terrorists, and there is an illegal civilian dwelling not far. Jammu Air Base also has a problem, and that's one reason why it's unable to expand.
Absolutely. This happened when Sunjma happened. You are aware of it. And most of the vital installations in our state have dwellings around, and where the construction has already come up. The only option is you can't demolish everything. Only option is to do verification of everybody living around the vital installations like Army and Air Force installations and other important installations. So we need to verify everyone living in that proximity, and in future, wherever such important installations are coming up, don't allow, have the government order issued and don't allow any new constructions around those airfields or other vital installations.
Oh, absolutely. Because Sandeep, just look at what happened during Pulwama. So you had a vehicle-borne IED, it came and crashed into a bus, and we had more than 40 fatalities, and one terrorist was killed, the terrorist who was driving that vehicle. But in this case, if you have a military convoy going through the mountains and you have an IED coming in a UAV, so no terrorist will be killed. They'll have advantage of height in mountains. They'll strike with no cost to them. And that is where the threat just becomes so much more intense.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And it's not going to be a lone IED attack on a convoy. They're possibly going to attack in swarms. And this has been demonstrated by ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and then later, of course, by the Houthis in Saudi Arabia. So this is a line that must be drawn, Gaurav, because otherwise, this, the sky is literally going to be the limit for non-state actors and indeed the deep state across the border. Because tomorrow you can have plausible deniability saying that there was no people on the ground, but you can carry out attacks of the nature that you described, and that there is no shortage of targets that they're going to be looking at. So this has to be taken very, very seriously, Gaurav. This is the first attack of its kind, and this is a problem that must be nipped in the bud.
It must be. This is grey zone warfare. This is extremely dangerous warfare. The Indian Air Force will have to up its game in protecting its air bases from land and from the skies. It needs better assets, it needs better resources, it also needs better deployment of those resources. We'll be tracking the story very closely. Air Marshal Ahluwalia, Mr. Ved and Sandeep Punithan for the moment. Many thanks for joining me. I need to slip into a quick break at this stage as we track the story closely. On the other side of this break, we will tell you about the best colleges in India, and perhaps solutions to the problems that we face may just come from future generations at these colleges.